Hey guys, welcome back. This month is September, and September is Neonatal Intensive Care Unit Awareness Month. It's hard for me to say. It's NICU Awareness Month. And every year in September, I like to tell my son's birth story because he was an unexpected NICU baby. So we found out we were expecting when we lived in San Diego. So he was conceived in February, and we moved out here back to Fargo, North Dakota in July, over the July 4th weekend. He was born in November, and up until that point, everything was totally normal. My blood pressure was higher in San Diego than it was my entire pregnancy. I think when we moved, I de-stressed a lot, and being off birth control totally changed that. So everything was wonderful and healthy, and it was perfect. But by the time I reached my 39th week, which was a week out from his original due date, which was November 10th, my blood pressure had started going up, which was pretty much not normal for my entire pregnancy. So I was ordered on bed rest for a few days, and it had stayed elevated, so they decided to induce me or get my labor started, and I came in on November 10th. So I've got my notes here because there's kind of a lot of details. They decided to induce me on Wednesday, November 11th of 2015. So we went into the hospital about 7 p.m., packed my bags, everything. I got ready. I had totally planned a completely natural, no drugs, lots of heavy breathing, totally natural birth. I was really bummed to have labor induced for me because I wanted everything to be, let my body do its thing. So I was kind of disappointed that we would have to induce, but at that point, having an induction was better than any other options like C-sections or a sick baby. So we went in, I was induced, labor started, and I labored through Wednesday night, all day Thursday through Thursday night until Friday morning. In the night on Thursday, my water had broken. I got an infection inside in my uterus because my water was broken for so long. During that time, I had a fever, and Magnus had breathed in meconium, which is baby poop. So he became distressed. So by Friday morning, we had to go in for an emergency C-section, which was not ideal. It was kind of the last thing I wanted for my birth story. But again, an emergency C-section that I got to hold him after and have Mike in there with me was still better than, having a sick baby. So we went into OR, and when you have a C-section, they give you an epidural, which makes you numb from the waist down, and you can be awake through your entire surgery. Well, the epidural didn't take. So I still had feeling below my waist, and they can't cut me open if I can feel everything. So I had to go completely under, which means that Mike was not able to be in the operating room with me, and I had no idea what was going on. I woke up 2 hours later, I think it was about 2 hours later, in the recovery room from surgery, and I woke up and I looked at the nurses and I asked them, because they're buzzing around, and I asked them if they had if Mike had gotten to see the baby yet. And that was the second when I knew everything was not good. They looked at each other like, what do we say? What do we do? And one of them finally said, he's in NICU, he had some breathing issues. And I thought, breathing issues is okay. He's alive if he's just got a few breathing issues. So I was still foggy and in and out. I went up to my room where Mike was waiting for me. My poor husband, bless him, had sat through this entire ordeal in our hospital room and had no idea what was going on. Nobody came and told him what was happening with me. Nobody came and told him what was happening with the baby. They just told him when I was out of surgery that I was out of surgery. That's all he knew. So this poor guy is up there on what's supposed to be a really happy day, wondering if either of us are coming back to the room. Okay, so I get back to the room and Mike's there, and we are kind of confused and wondering what's going on, and our doctors come in. They explain to us that it wasn't a great surgery. I lost a lot of blood. to the effect of about a third of my entire, like the entire volume of blood in your body, and I lost about a third of that. So I was not feeling very good. I'd hemorrhaged during surgery, and that's all that happened. Not all, but it was pretty scary for a while. So I had a rough time during surgery, and then it turns out Magnus, because he had aspirated on meconium, had some other issues, which are much more rare. Meconium aspiration is, I don't want to say common, but it does happen frequently. They just clean out the lungs and the babies go in. But Magnus had a harder time of it. He had persistent pulmonary hypertension in newborns. I had to look it up to get the full definition. It's a really long thing, but basically after a baby is born, there's a switch that flips in their heart to get their blood flowing to the lungs, because when they're inside, they're basically underwater, so they're not breathing in air. And then after a typical baby is born, that switch kind of flips over to let their lungs start working, and his didn't. So he came out, and the doctor described him as a pretty floppy baby, and they got him breathing on a ventilator. The ventilator is the tube that goes all the way into their lungs, and he was on that for quite a few days. I have a blog on this. It's much longer, goes into much more detail. So basically, he was in NICU for a long time. He was heavily sedated, and it was 10 days before he got his breathing tube out. I will also say at this point that I was not able to hold my son this entire time. I didn't get to pick him up and hold him in my arm for 13 days. So he came out of the womb and went immediately into tubes and wires and prods and a table that weighed him, and he had jaundice, so he got one of those neon jaundice lights. He had a really tough time, but the hardest thing was that I wasn't able to comfort him. The most we could do, because of his illness, he could not have any stimulation, so he had like a mask over his eyes the entire time. We had to speak in low tones, so I couldn't sing to him, I couldn't talk to him, I couldn't rub him at all. I could place my hand on top of his head and place my hand on his chest. So we spent hours like this on our baby. So for 13 days he was in there tubed up. I just remember that there's a machine that's next to the bed, and it tells you their oxygen levels, and we would watch that like a hawk, because I knew as soon as they could start turning the oxygen that they were giving him down, and they had to do it by the tiniest increments. But once we saw that number going down, that meant that we knew he was getting better. And it took about 10 days before that happened, and then another 2 days before they could take the breathing tube out, and then at that point I got to hold him. But the entire time I was pumping at home, so when he was finally taken off of feeding tubes and they could give him, excuse me, some nourishment, it was breast milk, and I was really, really happy that I was able to do that for him, because I knew that's really what his body needed. Okay, so the 13th day I got to hold him, which was Thanksgiving, by the way. We had an early dinner with my family, and then we were at the hospital in the morning when I had dinner with my family, and then we went back, and when we went back, I got to hold him, and it was pretty awesome. It was the first time, and there's going to be pictures in here. Then on the 19th day, we went up to NICU, and we scrubbed in. Something a lot of people don't know is that if you're a parent in NICU, every time you enter and exit the room, you have to scrub in. And scrubbing in means 3 minutes, and you have to set a timer where you scrub your hands with the most awful, drying, stinky soap, and you have to take all your jewelry off. You have to scrub under your fingernails, you have to scrub up to your elbow. So we would do this every time we came in or out of the room, which sometimes was 3 times a day. But we stayed there as much as we could. So we did that. On the 19th day, we went in and did all of that, and we walked to his bed, and he wasn't there, which of course is immediate panic if you're, coming in the morning and your baby's missing from NICU. But it turns out that he was moved across the hall to a recovery room where he shared with the 2 cutest little baby girls that had been there for quite a bit longer than we had. I think they were on day 30 and 32 or something like that. I can't remember exactly. But then that means that the next day we got to go home. And Mike had to work, so he did not get to bring Magnus home. My dad did. He came to the hospital and he got to hold Magnus for the first time that day. And we packed him up and brought him home, and he's been a perfect bundle of joy since then. He is huge. They say that some NICU babies are, small and frail and kind of stay like that the rest of their life. That I think applies to some preemies, but I don't think that's typical. Magnus was a full-term baby, so even from birth, he was the biggest baby in the room. And he's a huge 2-year-old. He's over 3 feet tall. He's 45 pounds. And he's just pure energy. So that is Magnus's birth story. I will do another video coming up soon about support for NICU moms. It's a completely crazy different experience than I think anybody really realizes is what happens. And it makes you part of kind of a family. Every time I meet somebody new who either was in the NICU before or after me, we immediately bond and kind of talk about our war stories. So that is Magnus's birth story. It is the story of a baby who, by all accounts, should never have seen the inside of a NICU and stayed there for almost a month. It really made me realize how you cannot take anything for granted. In an instant, everything can change and get very scary and very emotional. But I will say that the whole experience really helped to strengthen the relationship between Mike and myself, and it made me really cherish the time I have with my child as he's still small. There is never a time I won't hug him when he asks for it. I'll snuggle him as much as possible. Yeah, some of it probably is some mom guilt from those first 20 days where I couldn't really do much for him. But he's grown into an independent little smart little goofball, and I love him so, so much. So that is my story to commemorate NICU Awareness Month. I do have some articles on NICU Mom and NICU Mom Life on my blog, which I will link below, and I will be doing another video this week. All right, you guys, thank you so much for watching. Have a wonderful evening, and I love you. Bye, 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 bye. Hey, what are you eating? What is it? It's so funny.